Currently, Earth.
It was February 21st in the year 1848 that the Communist Manifesto, written by Karl Marx with the assistance of Friedrich Engels, is published in London by a group of German-born revolutionary socialists known as the Communist League. The political pamphlet, arguably the most influential in history, proclaimed that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles, and that the inevitable victory of the proletariat, or working class, would put an end to class society forever. Originally published in German as Manifest der Kommunistischen Partei, Manifesto of the Communist Party, the work had little immediate impact. Its ideas, however, reverberated with increasing force into the 20th century, and by 1950, nearly half the world's population lived under Marxist governments. Karl Marx was born in Trier, Prussia, in 1818, the son of a Jewish lawyer who converted to Lutheranism. He studied law and philosophy at the universities of Berlin and Jena, and initially was a follower of G.W.F. Hegel, the 19th century German philosopher who sought a dialectical and all-embracing system of philosophy. In 1842, Marx became editor of the Rheinische Zeitung, a liberal democratic newspaper in Cologne. The newspaper grew considerably under his guidance, but in 1843, the Prussian authorities shut it down for being too outspoken. That year, Marx moved to Paris to co-edit a new political review. Let's try that enunciation over again. Rheinische, yeah, that's right. Zeitung, yeah, that's right. Paris was at the time a center for socialist thought, and Marx adopted the more extreme form of socialism known as communism, which called for a revolution by the working class that would tear down the capitalist world. In Paris, Marx befriended Friedrich Engels, a fellow Prussian who shared his views and was to become a lifelong collaborator. In 1845, Marx was expelled from France and settled in Brussels, where he renounced his Prussian nationality and was joined by Engels. During the next 2 years, Marx and Engels developed their philosophy of communism and became the intellectual leaders of the working class movement. In 1847, the League of Just, a secret society made up of revolutionary German workers living in London, asked Marx to join their organization. Marx obliged, and with Engels renamed the group the Communist League and planned to unite it with other German worker committees across Europe. The pair were commissioned to draw up a manifesto summarizing the doctrines of the League. Back in Brussels, Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in January of 1848, using as a model a tract Engels wrote for the League in 1847. In early February, Marx sent the work to London, and the League immediately adopted it as their manifesto. Many of the ideas in the Communist Manifesto were not new, but Marx had achieved a powerful synthesis of disparate ideas through his materialistic conception of history. The manifesto opens with the dramatic words, quote, "A specter is hunting Europe, the specter of communism," unquote, and ends by declaring, quote, "The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Workers of the world, unite," unquote. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx predicted imminent revolution in Europe. The pamphlet had hardly cooled after coming off the presses in London when the revolution broke out in France on February 22nd over the banning of political meetings held by socialists and other opposition groups. Isolated riots led to popular revolt, and on February 24th, King Louis Philippe was forced to abdicate. The revolution spread like brushfire across continental Europe. Marx was in Paris on an invitation of the provincial government when the Belgian government, fearful that the revolutionary tide would soon engulf Belgium, banished him. Later that year, he went to Rhineland, where he agitated for armed revolt. The bourgeoisie of Europe soon crushed the revolution of 1848, and Marx would have to wait longer for his revolution. He went to London to live and continued to write with Engels as they further organized the international communist movement. In 1864, Marx helped found the International Workingmen's Association, known as the First International, and in 1867 published the first volume of his monumental Das Kapital, the foundation work of communist theory. By his continuance of eternity in 1883, communism had become a movement to be reckoned with in Europe. 34 years later, in 1917, Vladimir Lenin, a Marxist, led the world's first successful communist revolution in Russia. It was February 21st in the year 1885 that the Washington Monument, built in honor of America's revolutionary hero and first president, is dedicated in Washington, D.C. 555-foot-high marble obelisk was first proposed in 1783, and Pierre L'Enfant left room for it in his designs for the new U.S. Capitol. After George Washington's continuance of eternity in 1799, plans for a memorial for the father of the country were discussed, but none were adopted until 1833, the centennial of Washington's birth. Architect Robert Mills' hollow Egyptian obelisk design was accepted for the monument, and on July 4th in 1848, the cornerstone was laid. Work on the project was interrupted by political quarreling in the 1850s, and construction ceased entirely during the American Civil War. Finally, in 1876, Congress, inspired by the American Centennial, passed legislation appropriating $200,000 for completion of the monument. In February of 1885, the Washington Monument was formally dedicated, and 3 years later, it was opened to the public, who were permitted to climb to the top of the monument by stairs or elevator. The monument was the tallest structure in the world when completed and remains today, by District of Columbia law, the tallest building in the nation's capital. It was February 21st in the year 1981 that the awesome and beautiful Dolly Parton cements her crossover success as 9 to 5 hits number one. In 1980, Dolly Parton brought the full range of her talents to bear on a project that would cement her crossover from country music to mainstream superstardom. The project was the movie 9 to 5, for which Dolly wrote and performed a song that earned her both Oscar and Grammy nominations, as well as semi-official status as a true pop icon. The biggest hit of Dolly Parton's career, the song 9 to 5, reached number one on the pop charts on February 21st in the year 1981. In addition to writing and singing the theme songs, Dolly also acted in 9 to 5, playing the role of a secretary prejudged on looks alone, not only by her sleazy male boss, played by Dabney Coleman, but also by her female colleagues, played by Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda. The role played very much on the image that Dolly created and toyed with in the real world, that of the apparent blonde bimbo. The wigs, the accent, the outfits, and it must be said, the famously ample bosom, were a significant part of Dolly's public persona, as was her eagerness to make fun of her own image. "It takes a lot of money to look this cheap," was her most famous self-deprecating wisecrack. All of it helped make Dolly Parton a hugely famous and widely popular personality from the early 80s onward, yet it didn't hint at the decade of brilliant musical achievement that preceded this phase of Dolly's life. Long before most Americans knew her name, Dolly Parton had established a reputation in Nashville and beyond based not on her outsized image, but on her brilliant and restrained country singing and songwriting. Dolly left the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee for Nashville the same day she graduated high school and thought it took several years of struggling. By the late 1960s, she was an established figure in the world of country music, best known for her regular appearances on The Porter Wagoner Show. It was in the early 70s, though, that she made her name as a solo performer and songwriter. Jolene and Coat of Many Colors may be her best-known country hits from that period, but Parton also wrote and recorded I Will Always Love You, which would go on to be one of the biggest pop hits of the 1990s for Whitney Houston. Dolly did not enjoy similar success with the movies that followed her acting debut in 9 to 5. 1982's Best Little Whorehouse in Texas with Burt Reynolds and 1984's Rhinestone with Sylvester Stallone. She did have another number one pop hit in 1983 with Islands in the Stream, a duet with Kenny Rogers, and she has enjoyed a resurgence of interest in recent years in the kind of rootsy bluegrass influenced work that preceded her big breakthrough with 9 to 5.
The information documented on this audio file can be verified on history.com.